Thank you, Sophie. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Our speaker today is Dr. Chihiro Innoue. She is Associate Professor at the Center for Research in English Language Learning and Assessment, or CRELLA, at the University of Bedfordshire in the United Kingdom. Her research centers on the interplay between test taker characteristics, task design, and the features of elicited language, which has led her research focus towards test accommodations in high-stakes language testing in recent years. She has led over 20 externally funded projects for language testing organizations and government bodies worldwide, and she serves as Associate Chair of the newly established Accessibility Special Interest Group of the International Language Testing Association, or ILTA. Today, Dr. Innoue will give a talk titled Dyslexia Across Writing Systems, Implications for Test Accommodations in High-Stakes English Language Assessment. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Innoue.
Thank you, Finley. Thank you, Sophie. Let me just share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Great. Yes. So I'm Chihiro. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for coming on Friday, which is people's quite busy day. So I'll be talking about dyslexia across writing systems, and it's a joy to share with you this core question that has stuck to me for a few years now. Yeah, I'll just go through the overview of this presentation first. So the motivation for this talk was, coming from conducting a research project that was actually funded by Duolingo on test takers with dyslexia and on the effects of extended time in the test. And that got me thinking, what happens when dyslexia, hides or doesn't surface in one language, but surfaces in another? And I'll go into the theoretical foundations, definition of dyslexia, and then hypothesis of granularity and transparency. I'll go into that a bit later. Number 3 would be evidence from Japanese and Chinese L1 populations, so some key references that looks into Chinese, Japanese dyslexia and English reading and writing profiles of theirs. Then I'll go into introducing some stories from 3 learners that we interviewed in that research project that I mentioned, which is a qualitative case study, their profiles, interview data, and experiences of their L1 as well as English learning journey. And then we found that that there is systemic barriers to test accommodations, and what might why that entails, and what can we do to achieve to solution. I don't have an answer to that. I'm going to be upfront about it, and through this talk I would hope to open the dialogue. So what evidence would count, and what does fairness look like for these people? Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, this is basically a secondary analysis of interview data that we conducted. I conducted together with my colleague Linda Taylor, funded by Duolingo. And one of the participants who is diagnosed with dyslexia mentioned this in their interview. So I'm going to read it out. In Japanese, I read books. I can read kanji. Kanji is Chinese characters. And apart from kanji writing, there was nothing I struggled with at all. Then English started in junior high school. And by the 3rd year, when we began reading longer texts, I was just so slow and couldn't finish anything in time. Even now, after reading English for 30 minutes, I'd be completely exhausted and the text started to look distorted. And this surprised me. So a few years ago, I did not know very much about dyslexia, and I also didn't know how stark the difference could be in different languages, how it manifests itself in dyslexia. So that was the starting point. Now, let's just look broadly. What is dyslexia for those who are not familiar with it? This is a very general picture of what dyslexia might look like. So when you see a word cat, right, that's your brain, and you would recognize that, oh yeah, that's cat, right? That's pronounced as cat. And then, oh, I know cat. I know this furry animal with 4 legs, long tails, very cute. Yeah, so you recognize the letters and you recognize how it's pronounced. And also that relates to your mental lexicon, like mental dictionary of, what a cat is. So meaning, yeah, so you can make connections between the written form, sound form, and the meaning. Now, if you have dyslexia, a lot of people tend to have difficulties making that connections. So the connections between the sound and the written form and the meaning mapping. Also, not all, but some people with dyslexia might see some distorted, lines as they go through text. So you can imagine that reading would be quite a challenge for those people with dyslexia. It's going to be quite slow, it's going to be quite painful. And this is primarily why extended time is primary accommodation type that is given to dyslexic test takers. Now, more detailed definition. So last year, International Dyslexia Association based in the US has published a revised definition of dyslexia, which is quite long and quite comprehensive. And I'm not going to ask you to read it all, but I have, so there are a few comments to make. So the definition has been revised the first time in about 20 years, and that was basically accumulation of research and extensive consultation with experts and also non-experts about the definition of dyslexia. So a lot of work has gone into this revision of the definition. And what I would like to highlight within that is, these. So let's go through it. First, dyslexia is a specific learning disability characterized by difficulties in word reading and or spelling that involve accuracy, speed, or both, and vary depending on the orthography. Now, it's very interesting that, very depending on the orthography is one of the new feature that's been added to the revised definition. And a few lines down, underlying difficulties with phonological and morphological processing are common, not universal. And then consequences of that include reading comprehension problems and reduced reading and writing experience that would affect other areas of learning. So the revision was partly informed by the global perspectives that accumulated research over the past 20 years have been formed, that one's language orthography seems to influence the nature of word-level literacy problems and underlying factors. And the primary influences are the unit of representation, or what is called granularity. Basically, it's the minimal unit of phonology, minimal unit of sound in a language. So it could be phoneme, it could be syllable, it could be morpheme. And also the transparency of the orthography. Transparency could be deep or shallow, or more transparent, less transparent or opaque. I'll explain that in a minute. So granularity. So this two-headed arrow represents a continuum. So towards the left is the smaller grain sized orthography. Towards the right is more coarse, larger grain sizes. So alphabets, the English alphabet and Middle Eastern abjads are said to be small grain sizes. That's, the minimal unit of sound is quite small. And then in the middle, towards the right, Indian upper syllabaries, akshanas, and then Japanese kana systems is on the larger side, syllabaries, morphographs, ideographs, Chinese characters are on this large grain size, the continuum. Now to show you a bit of an example, so let's take the example of the cat again, then cat is pronounced as ah and t. So that's 3 units, 3 small size of units of phonology. And in the middle, the green part, so the first 2 characters represent ne, ko in Japanese. That's 2 characters representing the sound ne and ko. And on the right-hand side, the blue one, the character, Chinese character, represents neko, or I think in Chinese it's mao. So you can see that, compared to the cat, the sound that constitutes cat is finer grained than neko or, the Japanese kana or Chinese characters in terms of how how the sound is, sort of dissected. So that's the granularity. And another aspect is transparency. So transparency refers to, please look at the bottom, consistency between written language units and spoken language units. So let's take an example. So more transparent orthography includes Finnish, Italian, Spanish. Basically, you read as it's written. Yeah. And on the right-hand side is deep or opaque, less transparent language families. So French, Danish, English are on the opaque side. Now, if you think about English, the sequence of letters of O, U, G, H, yeah, can be pronounced as through, thought, rough. So that's not quite transparent. It can be read in different ways, and it can be quite confusing. So yeah, English is on the opaque side. Now, if you think about Japanese kana, that's one of the three writing systems that Japanese language use. This first letter is always pronounced as ne, and it's regardless of what word combination, letter combinations comes with it. It's always ne, so that's transparent. Now, interestingly, when it comes to Chinese characters, then it's not really transparent at all because the logographic feature of that or any component that composes this cat character does not give you any clue as to how it's pronounced. So you basically need to memorize how it's sounded. So it is on the opaque side, yeah, in a sense. So that's the transparency. So hypothesis of granularity and transparency that was advocated by Wydell and Butterworth in 1999, who predicted the visibility of dyslexia may differ by writing systems. So granularity, again, is the size of the phonological unit mapped, to the script. And the prediction is the larger the unit is, the lower phonological demand it is. Therefore, you would see fewer reading problems. In terms of transparency, which is a consistency of what is written and how it sounded, kind of correspondence, the opaque or less transparent it is, it will amplify phonological processing demands, and therefore it's going to be more difficult to read. So the key prediction here was that individuals with phonological deficits may be asymptomatic, do not show any symptoms in high granularity, high transparency scripts, like high granularity, Chinese characters, Japanese kana, or high transparency, especially with Japanese kana systems. But they might surface in English because it's very small grained and it's not very transparent scripts. To summarize, I'm kind of repeating myself, but I think it's important, so I'll go through it. So let's look at the first line, cat. So English alphabet cat. The phonological unit is a and t. So that's 3 units, very fine-grained. So level of phonological processing is required at the phoneme level. And because the orthography, as we've seen with through, thought, rough, it's opaque, and the unit is very fine-grained. So if you have phonological deficit, then the impact is quite high on the reading. In the middle line is neko, that's the 2 letters that represents ne and ko. That's phonological units. There's 2 units or phonological unit, and the level of phonological processing is a bit coarser, which is called Mora level. Orthography is transparent because ne is always pronounced as ne, ko is always pronounced as ko, no matter where it is. And it's coarsely grained and cat. So if you have phonological deficit, the impact is thought to be low. Now, the bottom line, the neko or mao script, the logographic script there. So that's just one character representing one unit, one word. Yeah, so the level of phonological processing is at the word level or a morpheme level, some would say. And orthography is opaque because, as I said, that doesn't really give you any clue as to how it's pronounced. But it's really coarsely grained. And also, you see it, and then, enough experience, you would just see that, oh yeah, this is Neko. And it does help. So if you have phonological deficit, the impact on the reading would be moderate, was the prediction. So because it's, coarse grain size, and then visual, recognition helps. In morphological awareness, it's more central than the phonological processing. So that's basically what it means. Yeah, the hypothesis of granularity and transparency. Now, some research evidence from Japanese and Chinese L1 populations, for example, McBride and Chang and colleagues, 2012, who conducted a longitudinal study of Hong Kong-based Chinese children with reading difficulties in Chinese, English, or both. So it's very interesting that they were able to identify these children with difficulties in Chinese only and English only, or both, in both languages. And all groups exhibited some degrees of weak phonological awareness. And poor readers in Chinese only, or both languages, showed lower morphological awareness. That's to do with the Chinese characters. And poor readers in both languages were found to be slow in symbol to sound meaning mapping. So their weaknesses differed according to which language their weaknesses showed. It's quite interesting. And the Wydell and Butterworth 1999, who advocated for the hypothesis of granularity and transparency, this was based on the case of bilingual Japanese-English boy who had no reading difficulties in Japanese but significant dyslexia in English. And also another Japanese-based study, Innoue and colleagues, 2009, Japanese children with reading difficulties manifest differently in the 3 writing systems within the Japanese language. So for kana, which is very transparent, the manifestation was only 0.2%. Katakana, which is very similar to kana, but mainly used in foreign loan words, slightly increased, 1.4%. And kanji, which is the Chinese characters, went up to 6.9%. So you could see that there's evidence that different writing systems would have different prevalence of difficulties. And also in both countries, some limited formal diagnostic infrastructure is in place for dyslexia. In Japan, especially I'm familiar, you will have to go through psychiatrist, yeah, and you need to take the intelligence test, you need to first tick all the boxes for your daily struggle, and then go to the tests and go to referrals, will be made to the psychiatrist. And so that's a long process, and there's cultural stigma, and because of that, accommodation frameworks are relatively underdeveloped. Okay, so this is where I turn to the 3 learners that we interviewed in the project, and there are 3 stories there. So as I mentioned before, secondary analysis of interview data this is based on, and 3 participants I am going to refer to. So participant 1, P1, and participant 2 were Japanese L1 learners. Participant 3 was Chinese L1 learner. And all of them underwent a form of formal cognitive or diagnostic assessment for dyslexia. The data sources was the semi-structured interviews that we conducted, lasted about 30 to 45 minutes each, conducted in English for participant 3, in Japanese for participant 1 and 2. Sorry, I must have deleted this part, but Japanese for the participant 1 and 2, and English for participant 3. And they also shared diagnostic reports where possible. And basically what we asked them to tell us was their own reflective accounts of their first language learning experiences, and also English learning experiences. And ethical approval was obtained through the university ethical committee. Full informed consent was obtained, and I am anonymizing their names. Okay, So their profiles at a glance. So participant one, a Japanese, aged 18, and they were studying for Japanese university admission. Their difficulty in Japanese was that they were slow in reading aloud and they had some difficulties writing Chinese characters. And when it came to English, they struggled to remember spelling and they were quite slow in reading speed. Informal assessment or diagnosis was obtained through speech pathologist in a research project. I'll go into that a little bit in detail later. And participant two, quite similar, but yeah, quite young, Japanese, age 20. They were undergraduate student at a Japanese university and experienced only minor difficulties, that's what they said, in writing kanjis, Chinese characters, and English. They were very slow in reading and struggled to remember spelling. And after about 20-30 minutes, they would, start to see like distorted lines of English. And like participant one, they participated in the research project that was not our project that involved some diagnosis. So that was not a regular route for diagnosis really. Participant three, L1 Chinese Mandarin speaker. They were age 36, so they were mature students, PhD student at a UK-based university. Apart from occasional unusual errors in Chinese character writing, they didn't have any other problems. Now, when it came to English, they had very slow reading speed, and formal diagnosis was obtained through educational psychologists at an institution in Malaysia. Now, when I looked at the interview scripts, four main themes emerged. So theme one was L1 difficulties were not very visible. They had some, but they were not very visible. So they retrospectively they identified minor difficulties like Chinese character writing was a little bit hard. Maybe I was a bit slow in reading aloud, but these had never been flagged as very grave, and it was never framed as dyslexia. So as participant one said, this is a translated version, I had some difficulty in writing kanji, Chinese characters, in Japanese at school, but there were other students like that, so I didn't really, think I stood out that much. And participant three, and I had no issues in Chinese, except that sometimes people would tell me I made unusual or untypical mistakes in writing Chinese characters. So it was common among these three participants that some difficulties were experienced, but not serious enough to trigger any support provision or diagnosis. And therefore, no referral was made to like the formal educational psychologist or specialist support in their country of origin. And this is actually in line, these observations are in line with this in predictions made by the hypothesis of granularity and transparency that cause granularity scripts reduce visibility of phonological deficits that are often the character of the dyslexia. Theme two, so English as the context of revelation. So not so much problem in the L1, but when English came, that really prevailed the problem. So yeah, when difficulty became undeniable, really noticeable. As participant two said, I would spend hours practicing spelling to no avail. When reading in English text aloud, other students would finish so fast while I struggled to read even one sentence. It was completely different from what they could do in Japanese. So specific challenges reported included about the spelling, inability to recall letter sequences, persistent errors, even in high frequency words, and reading fluency, slow, effortful, word by word reading. And then participant two also said that, well, I would get really tired and overloaded that, lead to the distorted vision of the text. So it's very interesting that they were making effort, but the difficulties experienced was very disproportionate to the effort and time invested. They were not lazy, they were trying the hardest, but they just couldn't do it. and also disproportionately low achievement compared to other school subjects. So yeah, disproportionate was the key word here. Theme 3, difficulty in obtaining diagnosis. So as I explained a little bit earlier, participant 1 and 2, they were both sort of suspected to have dyslexia in English language by a private tutor who happened to be very knowledgeable in that area, and they started going to a private dedicated English classes by that tutor that's dedicated to dyslexic children, and especially in the English language. And diagnosis was obtained through participating a research project, that was on Japanese children with dyslexia. So it's not a formal route usually. And interestingly, the diagnostic test involved reading aloud and writing in Japanese, and rapid automatization naming, which is basically naming what you see, like in the picture, in Japanese, and also some visual attention tests using Japanese writing systems, kana, kanji, numbers, and symbols. So that's quite interesting because the test is based in Japanese, where they perceived to not have many problems. And participant 1 got the diagnosis of, yes, you have dyslexia in Japanese. Participant 2, however, was suspected to have dyslexia, so not as decisive as the participant 1 in Japanese. But participant 2 was actually very severe in the symptoms of dyslexia in English language. So they were really tired after reading, and severe difficulties in like recognizing spelling as well. So yeah, that's very interesting that they were tested in Japanese, and I think that's also part of the systemic issue. So participant 3, dyslexia in English was suspected by the supervisor. So they were PhD students, so it was suspected by a PhD supervisor, and the supervisor recommended that perhaps you should get a diagnosis so that maybe deadline considerations and other supports can be in place. So they sought diagnosis, and it was firstly during COVID, and in the NHS in the UK, public health systems, there's no real clear pathways for adults to get diagnosed for dyslexia. So they would all either go to like private educational psychologists or go overseas, and they chose to be tested online by a dedicated dyslexia institution in Malaysia. So yeah, none of them obtained it through like a formal route. Theme 4, systemic barriers to accessing test accommodations. And this was especially the case for participants 1 and 2, the Japanese participants, who encountered significant obstacles when seeking accommodations for like university admission tests. Because 1, they did not have the prior documentation of their difficulties. They did not have formal diagnosis in Japanese because they didn't really have much of a problem, and therefore they didn't have a history of different accommodations in place at school to support the application if you were to make the application for testing accommodations or school records, and from the Japanese context. So they didn't have this evidence, and testing organizations require some form of evidence of established needs. They consider case by case basis, and they are very humane approach. So how can we help this test taker? But without the trail of evidence, it's quite difficult. And also mismatch of the diagnostic tools. So because the assessments were done in Japanese based tests, may not detect or reflect the severity of the difficulties that are experienced in English. So that surprised me. And that I've been thinking about what can we do with this, the lack of evidence, but their struggle is really real. And as I said, I don't have an answer, and I would like us to start thinking what can we do? So to summarize the this, the current accommodation frameworks assume a documentary trail, right? So you will have difficulty identified maybe at school. So the teacher might flag it up, teaching assistant, parents might flag it up, and that would lead to an assessment, possibly diagnosis. And then there's going to be some accommodations in place at school, and the candidate would have a history and documentation of the accommodations that are in place, and that can form the evidence that are submitted to the testing board, right? And this trail, as we have seen, does not exist for some learners, and it's not because they didn't go through it, it's just no fault of their own. So the key question here is, okay, so if the evidence, the usual evidence, does not exist, then what non-medical, maybe educationally informed evidence could substitute? Yeah. And possibility maybe worth exploring could be maybe accepting evidence from less established sources, like private supplementary educational institutions are less well known, not public, but dedicated to dyslexia, possibly. And if you have, some research projects, and there are some certificates, certification or profiling of the cognitive abilities showing, some phonological processing deficits, even without formal diagnosis, is it worth considering? But then there's a tension always. Expanding this evidence base must also guard against misuse and cheating. So yeah, again, you are faced with, so accessibility and also, need to standardize and integrity keeping. Yeah, so for accessibility, inclusivity, accommodating learners whose needs are real, is, on us, isn't it, as language testers, especially, because it's systemic reasons, not really because it's lazy, it's due to laziness or anything like that. And test validity is undermined if disability is not accommodated where it should be. More a case is that barriers are an artifact of the writing systems and systemic failure, possibly to capture their struggles and evidence it. So we should be able to do something about this. But at the same time, integrity, standardization point of view, accommodation is considered on a case-by-case basis, which is quite resource intensive. And also without documentation, without good, record of evidence, verification is challenging. And also justification for accommodation is very challenging to make. And if you sort of widen the evidence base, then there's a risk of inflation of accommodation requests in high stakes context. And we know that the vast majority of test takers are honest, good-hearted, hard-working people, but there are also, small proportion but very dedicated, passionate people, who just, live for cheating the system. So there's always this tension. So when we think about what can we actually do, then I guess the starting point is always acknowledging the gap. That's also why I have, decided to go for this topic, for this talk. So acknowledging the gap in the policies, recognize that there's actually cases where standard evidence of established need cannot be applied, and may disadvantage certain L1 groups with, cross-linguistic dyslexia. And awareness raising, accommodations team, external advisors, to recognize cross-linguistic dyslexia manifestations. I guess knowing its power, that's where it starts. And practically, I don't have an answer, but thinking about what would be the alternative evidence base. So maybe tiered evidence frameworks, like category A is like the strongest, more desirable category of evidence, like a standard report by a certified educational psychologist, and there's documentary evidence, of established needs at school, etc. Maybe there could be a category B, letters from teachers, private tutors accompanying, school reports to show the disproportionate achievement in English language as compared to other subjects. But I don't know. I can also imagine numerous problems that could also incur. So yeah, I am now sort of posing a few questions to you to start the discussion, I guess. So, first one is that what forms of non-medical evidence would your organization, if you're from a testing organization or even test score receiving institution, would you consider sufficient? And number two, are there other L1 groups for whom a similar invisible until English pattern might apply? Number three, how should the risk of misuse be balanced against the imperative for accessibility? So these are burning questions that I'm really happy to be able to share with you. And yeah, as I said, a number of times, I don't have the answer, and I would like us to start thinking together. And now I think I have spoken a little bit faster than I planned, but yeah, this is the key references, and I'll just go back to my discussion questions. So yeah, I think I'm a few minutes early, but anyway, I'll open the floor to the audience. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and yeah, any comments, suggestions, questions are all welcome. Thanks. Should I stop sharing? And I'll see.
I actually have a few questions from the audience.
Mm,
So
yes.
this first one right here is this person is interested in knowing what made you first become interested in researching, dyslexia in L2 in general.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I guess yeah, at the beginning, I showed you that, some remarks by the participants of this, research we did. But yeah, to start with, yeah, it was, so yeah, I am naturally interested in learner characteristics and how they interact with task characteristics within the test and how that might affect learner language or learner processes. So yeah, when there was this research call from Duolingo a few years ago that yeah, that was also accepting proposals in terms of the accessibility. And yeah, Linda and I basically said that, oh, this is very interesting. And we knew that some task types, item types within different tests seem to be dyslexia unfriendly or friendly. So yeah, we wanted to sort of see how different item types in Duolingo English test might affect these people with dyslexia test taking and also score changes as well. So that was the starting point.
Thank you. And here's another question. Could you briefly clarify the point about the moral case? I think they're referring to um, the second to last or third to last slide, where you
Mm,
have for access and for integrity. And
mhm,
there's one point called moral case,
mm.
that barriers are an artifact of a writing system. This person would like some clarification of this point.
Uh, Clarification of,
Like maybe just this point in general.
okay. Yeah, I think the barriers are, I guess the moral case was that because it's not really the fault of the learners, that the barriers that they cannot obtain the evidence is partly because of the um, writing systems, and also because the assessment tools are based on their first language, at least for the participant one and participant two's cases, and that it's not really well proven. The severity of their problems in English is not proven very well. And so that's the artifact of these in different writing systems, and not because of their laziness, or if they want to have just extra time for no good reasons. So yeah, that's what I wrote as the moral case. This answers the question.
Yeah, it's clear to me. Thank you. And then this next question, this participant is an ESL teacher for gifted teenagers,
Mm,
those who participate in highly competitive Olympics
mm,
activities.
mm.
I wonder if through your research you were focusing on exam results or school performance overall.
Um, so the original research that I referred to, it was about score change and yeah, overall score change and also the raw scores in different item types and also their experiences and perceptions of the usefulness of extended time. Yeah, we are trying to publish that study, but not yet coming.
Okay, this next question is, I've heard that there are special fonts that are easier for people with dyslexia to read. Do you know anything about these or like their effectiveness and whether any tests actually use them?
Mm, yeah, I think, yeah, thank you for the question. I'm not sure. I think it's a while ago that I looked into this, but as far as I can remember, there might be some latest research that says otherwise. But as far as I can remember, it was the font did not really lead to like a significant increase in like grades and scores, but it was basically the test takers or learners reading experiences that was that they felt that were made easier, and that's easier to see. Um, I think, um, yeah, I haven't really checked different tests fonts nowadays. I know that Duolingo is very careful about that. Yeah, other tests, I'm not sure. I'm sure they are very aware of it. Whether they can immediately change that, maybe another question.
Okay, next question. I wonder about test assessment or like assessment in general. Do you see any future implications of a separate language test for people with dyslexia or other speech-related difficulties?
Mm, mm, interesting question. Separate tests. I guess it depends on what you mean by separate tests, but possibly a different version of the test that allow the use of assistive technologies. And I think in some of the comments, I'm just really browsing really quickly through, but I think they some of them mentioned that well, dyslexic learners tend to use assistive technologies, and this is something that in large scale tests kind of struggle to address because um, yeah, if you instead of like reading with the eyes and you are listening, then the construct is changed. Um, but if that is the real language use, right, that you are daily practicing, then maybe there needs to be a different version that would allow that. But yeah, technologically, because it's always a battle between test security and if you allow the use of assistive technology, that means maybe remote proctoring may not work very well, yeah, etc. So there's another aspect to consider in order to make that. But yes, in principle, yes, I do think that that will be useful to have.
On a related note, someone in the chat mentioned that the students with dyslexia that I have encountered in higher education have often used text-to-speech to cope
Mm,
with their academic reading.
mhm.
What are the implications of this for academic reading tests?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think as I mentioned, so yeah, if that's the real language use domain, then the language test should be making efforts to replicate that. Yeah, and I guess because assistive technology has come a really long way nowadays, that you can basically make the technology read to you the whole thing in good time, and does not really disadvantage you from like reading the same amount of like reading processing same amount of text as other people who don't necessarily need to use the assistive technology, then um yeah, I guess academic reading construct for them is not really based on reading with the eyes now. It's, through listening, and I guess they're processing language slightly differently to what we have modeled traditionally.
Okay, the next question here is I'm just curious about how common is it to have dyslexia in L2 when one does not have the experience in L1?
Mm. Yeah, prevalence is an interesting area of research. So traditionally, um, so alphabet based, like in English language, they do say that they have like higher prevalence, possibly like 10, 12, 15%. Um, yeah, logographic languages like Japanese, Chinese, they were said to be lower, like possibly 6% or etc. But then there's always this problem of, okay, how are you testing it? Especially when it comes to cross-linguistic dyslexia. So I think, yeah, especially with those kind of, participants that I introduced today, it's blurred. I don't think there is any like accurate percentage yet.
Okay, the next question here. Does dyslexia also reveal itself through speaking and or executive function skills, like taking notes or analyzing information in their L2? Thinking of Chinese students of mine who keeps failing the same course.
Mm, mm. Um, I think yes, executive functions probably. I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, I guess the question means that dyslexia, so the phonological deficit or whatever would apply to speaking. Yeah, sorry, I'm just talking to myself. So yes, I think that the short answer is yes, because the language processing, would any difficulties, the deficits would manifest itself in the processing, and then yeah, the speed of processing, or the efficiency or accuracy of processing may be prevalent in different skills. So yeah, speaking, yes, note taking as well.
I think that's all the questions we have for now, at least in the Q&A box. And looks like does anyone have any more questions that they would like to ask? We still have about 11 minutes. Okay. What do you enjoy most about working in educational assessment? Okay, this is a very general question.
Oh, very general question. Um, I guess working to improve the assessments. I guess yeah, at the very general level, why I decided to devote myself to language testing was that how do you check the quality of language tests? So someone makes a language test, and how do we ensure the quality is high enough? And so yeah, education assessment. So how are things assessed, and is that does that include any like unconscious bias? Is there a better way of testing this construct, and how do you operationalize a construct? It's just very exciting. So yeah, that's basically my core interest. Thanks for the question.
Okay, we have another question. I am interested in exploring how much support test providers should offer to learners with special education needs and disabilities. I sometimes feel some assistance like reader, scriber may threaten test fairness.
Mm, Yeah, that's a very fair point, I think, and that relates to the use of assistive technology as well, isn't it? Because you would ask something else to read things for you. So yeah, they would they would change the construct, and also there may be other people who might not have a diagnosis of education special educational needs, but would definitely benefit from having, let's say, a text-to-speech function. Um, so yeah, I don't have an answer to that. So I guess it could be regarded as unfair, but at the same time, if that is how they usually process language, then that's the situation that language tests need to be sort of tried to replicate. Um, so in that sense, maybe the real world is just not fair in that sense because people use language differently. People process and use help differently in the real world, and that's just a reflection in the test.
Thank you. Here's another one. I think the question about whether there can be an alternative approach to identify dyslexia in L2 was interesting. There are pros and cons to this type of measurement. In your opinion, if it were to become available, how can we ensure that it will be used without hurting learners' emotions?
So would you repeat the last part? Sorry.
Um, if it were to become available, like the
Mm,
approach of diagnosing like dyslexia in L2,
mm,
how
mhm.
can we ensure that it will be used without hurting learners' feelings or emotions? Like they
Yeah.
don't seem to have dyslexia in L1, but then were
Mm,
diagnosed with dyslexia in
I
L2.
see. Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's a very good question. Uh, I I guess it's largely to do with sort of expectations, like at large, the societal, cultural expectation that this is not uncommon, and there are ways to sort of help, and there are. So yeah, I guess stigma is a big part of hurting one's feelings, isn't it? And the stigma is basically from the societal like model, like ideal, you know, um, model of good reader or yeah, good language user, etc. And I guess so in that sense, all people, really everyone in the society needs to be more inclusive in that sense. Um, yeah, but I guess to the immediate learner who may have dyslexia in L2 but not L1 and would be very surprised. Um, yeah, I guess it's not basically saying that like this is not uncommon. I don't know. Yeah, this it's not uncommon really. Yeah, although proportionately, compared to the whole population, it is small, but there are quite a lot of people because the population is quite big. So yeah, I think just awareness raising and yeah, as an educator, yeah, we would want to keep educating ourselves and sort of disseminate this. It is common, it's not uncommon. We can help you. There are accommodations to help you, etc. That's the message that we want to nurture.
Mhm. Okay. Another question. If a teacher suspects a student has dyslexia, but the family cannot afford a formal
Mm,
diagnosis
mhm,
or
mm,
no
mhm.
NHS available, what should the
Yeah,
teacher do?
yeah, that's the difficulty, isn't it? That's the difficulty. So yeah, there are cases where the parents can't really, accept or afford, right, to gain a diagnosis. And it's a difficult one, really, because if the parents are, parents can't afford or, can't admit, then does that mean the learner doesn't want it? Or I guess it depends on the learner as well. If they want it and if the teacher felt that they may well have it and they would benefit from having the diagnosis and, getting accommodations in place, then there should be a way, right, to prove that, to sort of document that to help them. And that's the alternative, I think, trail of evidence that we could start thinking about. So teachers' observations, yeah, school reports, if the learner is happy to share with the authorities, and yeah, testing organisation, etc. So yeah, but it is a difficult case. Yeah.
Okay, I found another one in the chat. Do you have any recommendations for high stakes standardized testing organizations in light of your research?
Hmm, interesting. That's a lot of research. So yeah, I have talked to different testing organizations over the past few years, through different projects, and I would say all the testing boards are very dedicated, and it's very resource intensive accommodation provision, and they are actually quite dedicated, team of people um in there. So I would not doubt that there are people who want to help the test takers, and whether you would find um, the types of accommodations useful that are provided by different tests. That's an important question. So if let's say, so computerized test, if you would like a human examiner, right, then it would be useful to have a test that would have like human component, human examining component for speaking. And if not, then that's fine. And there are some, tests that would allow, reader or scriber, and some tests don't. So it really depends on, what would work for you best. So yeah, I wouldn't just recommend one test over the others like that. It really depends on what might suit the test taker the best. And testing organizations are, yes, I repeat that they are doing a lot and they're doing their best.
Thank you, Chihiro. I think that's all the questions that we have.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for staying, and yeah, all the questions.